In one of the great movie scenes of one of the greatest movies of all time, Red, played by Morgan Freeman, says to Andy Dufresne, played by Tim Robbins, says to Morgan Freeman, whose character in the movie is named Red. He's talking to him about his kind of journey here at the Shawshank prison, and he describes that he has hope. And when he says the word hope, Morgan Freeman's character, Red, cringes, and all of the other inmates at the lunch table get quiet. And Red says to Andy Dufresne, hope is a dangerous thing. Hope can drive a man insane. Now, if you've never seen Shawshank Redemption, you might be wondering, why would Red say such a thing? Well, the truth is, he spent years and years and years of his life, almost all of his adult life, in prison. And he's come up for parole several times. He keeps getting denied parole. And he says to Andy, hope can be unreachable. Hope can be unattainable. For a guy like Red, who spent that much time in prison, to long for hope, to feel hope, to believe in hope, can only lead to a devastating letdown. To Red, hope was a dangerous thing. I bet there's a few of us in the room who can resonate with that, right? We want to be hopeful, but when relationships sour, when the world seems broken, when dreams disappear, hope can be hard to come by. In a broken world, in a world without guarantees, hope can feel like a dangerous thing, and yet this is the exact tension Jesus repeatedly, time after time, enters into in the gospel. Jesus is, after all, the hope dealer. A couple weeks ago, when Matt was teaching the first miracle story we're looking at in the month of June, we see the disciples who are scared for their life, and they are hoping just to live, and Jesus answers the bell and provides hope. Last week, we saw a man who was tormented and had lived most of his life without hope, come to Jesus, hoping that Jesus could change things. And then today, we see a dad who's desperate for his daughter to live, turn to Jesus. We see a woman who's experienced a chronic health issue for 12 years, who's went to every doctor she's known. She spent every penny she has trying to get better, and nothing has helped. We see her turn to Jesus. Mark's got a unique literary approach here in this gospel. When you read this story, you're supposed to read a story within a story. He's creating an intentional contrast for us to see. There's two women in this story. We see a 12-year-old girl who needs a miracle, and a woman who has suffered for 12 years wanting to be made whole. We see a young girl who, because of who her father is, she is socially important. And then we see a woman who has been made socially invisible. One of these two women has an acute emergency crisis. The other is suffering from a lifelong chronic condition. The father of the young girl approaches Jesus very publicly. He uses his position, his power, his influence to get an audience with Jesus. And yet this other woman kind of works her way through the crowd and secretly touches Jesus' coat. One is dying suddenly from seemingly out of nowhere, and the other is dying slowly. There is a ton of energy in the crowd for one of these women, and seemingly no one even notices or cares about the other. And one of the things Mark wants us to see is that Jesus stops for both of them. I think we can all relate to this story in some way. I loved sports growing up. I mean, I still do. I was ecstatic for 7th grade basketball tryouts. I gave everything I had for 2 days. And the final day of tryouts, some of you already know where the story's going. Dang. Coach sat us down. He gives us his pet dog. I am confident I've done everything that I could do to make the team and that I'm good enough. And he says, hey, the varsity team's posted in the locker door, and I go to the locker doors expecting to see my name, and my name's not on the varsity roster. I didn't make it. I was JV. And when you see this photo, you're not going to be able to understand why. I mean, I was benching 72 pounds. We had some really short shorts, too, back in the day. Here's the thing, though. I was so disappointed. I stoically and quickly got changed because by the time you're 13, you know you don't show emotion. And I go home, I go to my bedroom, shut the door, and I wept because I didn't make the team, didn't make the varsity, and the reasons were irrelevant. I was left on the outside looking in. And I bet, not just in 7th grade, but all through life, many of you have experienced that feeling. Maybe in elementary school, you were the one who was always last to get picked at recess, where you spent a lot of money, took out a lot of student loan, got all the college degrees, all the certifications, and you've gotten rejection letter after rejection letter from every application you filled out. Or maybe you're single, and it seems like all of your friends are married and having families and kids, and you feel like, hey, when do I get to be a part of that? Maybe growing up, your parents chose their career or a hobby over you, and they prioritized something else besides you. And to you, that felt like rejection because a job or golf or whatever was more important. I know from enough conversations with folks in this room that some people here have experienced rejection from the church, the one place you thought you were guaranteed to receive acceptance. There's many other experiences like this, but these sorts of experiences oftentimes cause us to wear labels. Sometimes we might wear a label that we're rejected, or we're the outsider, or we're not the ones that are not smart enough, or pretty enough, or good enough. We're just the broken. And if any of that resonates, if any of that connects, Jesus has really good news for you today. Jairus, the synagogue leader, was a man of great importance and great power. He's a major player in the inner workings of Jerusalem. He was a man who could get things done. He was a man who could command audiences. He could leverage his position for his benefit, particularly the benefit of his sick daughter. And who among us in the room wouldn't do everything we could to save the life of our child? And by this time in Jesus' ministry, like the buzz of who he is spreading beyond just Galilee. People are coming. They have heard there is a rabbi that is different than any other rabbi anyone has ever encountered. He's not just doing miracles, but he is teaching and speaking and commanding with a spiritual authority that just is different. And all of a sudden, the crowd grows from being able to fit inside of a house to not even be able to hear Jesus from the seashore. And so Jesus is all of a sudden becomes so popular. There's buzz and energy. And let's just name reality. Jairus is the sort of man the disciples want to help. He can help them get on the inside of the power circles in Jerusalem. And we see as the story of Jesus and his disciples unfold, that's what they are hoping for. They imagine an earthly kingdom where Jesus is going to set up and rule and reign, and they're going to get to be co-leaders. But the path to that for them is from Jerusalem and then to Rome. So how do they get on the inside? This is the type of man you treat with respect. This is the type of man you give deference to, you give priority to. He is a player at the table that you want to be at. And yet, just when it seems they might be able to do something for this influential political and spiritual leader in Jerusalem, a seemingly emergency situation interrupts the plan. Because there's a woman suffering from bleeding. She's hemorrhaging, and she has been for 12 years. And she's endured much under many doctors. She has spent everything she had, and nothing has helped her at all. Not just that, she's become worse. These three sentences tell us a lot about this woman. Now, Mark doesn't give us a specific diagnosis here. It's a bit vague, but today, an OBGYN probably could have evaluated this woman, could have done some imaging, some labs, given her some medications. Maybe there was a procedure or surgery, none of which was available to her in the first century. And she had spent 12 years going unsuccessful treatment in an ancient kind of medical practice. And it's left her exhausted, financially destitute, and living a life more and more on the margins of society. In light of her being a Jewish woman in a Jewish community, she most likely would have been excluded from temple activities because her condition would have labeled her ceremonially unclean under the Levitical law. Yet despite her condition, despite her rejection, she's got some sort of hope in her because she's heard the hope dealer is nearby. And this isn't just speculation. Having heard about Jesus, maybe if we get the chronology of what's going on here, maybe she has also heard that there was this other man who was out of his mind, who was tormented, who was seemingly on the outskirts of society, also excluded, seemingly without hope. And maybe this Jesus could do for her what he did for him. So having heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothing, for she said, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be made well. I want you to try to picture the scene. Use your imaginations with me this morning. I can kind of see this woman in the crowd, and she has observed Jesus. She probably knows who Jesus is because there's one person who's in the center of this kind of moving mob. I can imagine her kind of figuring out the trajectory of where he is, where he's going to be, and her strategically thinking, if I position myself this way, if I kind of work my way through the crowd this way, I can finally get to Jesus, I can work through, and I can just touch the hem of his garment. And when she does, instantly, this flow of blood ceased, and she sensed in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Now, I'm going to give you a little Bible nerdism here, but I think it's fascinating. There is a language shift from verse 28 to 29 that I find fascinating. Back in verse 28, she said she hoped she would be made well. It's the Greek word sozo. It means to be restored to health, to heal, to preserve oneself. Imagine you've got a cold and you've taken some NyQuil because tomorrow you want to feel better. You're hoping to remedy the situation. That's what the idea of the word means. And then when she describes what happens after she touches the coat of Jesus, she says that I have been healed. This is a different Greek word. Iomai, which means to be cured, to be made whole. It's a stronger statement about what's happened to her. It's as if she's saying, I'm not just improving, I've experienced complete restoration. I think there's no doubt you can probably feel it in the story. She is flooded with joy and happiness. 12 years she's been hoping to be made well. And finally, the hope dealer has come to where she is, and she has done the thing that she thought that would bring her wholeness, and it happens. She's got to be thrilled for 2 seconds because her anxiety and fear went through the roof with what happened next. Because right after she touches Jesus, he immediately turns around, realizes that his power has gone out, and he says to the crowd, who touched my clothes? Now, what's she feeling now? Man, did I do this the wrong way? Is it going to be taken back? I doubt she's the only one who's anxious. Matter of fact, I think Jairus and the disciples probably feel the most anxiety, right? Because the emergency is there's a 12-year-old girl who's about to die. There's a procession headed to Jairus' house, and all of a sudden Jesus stops because someone has, quote, touched his clothing. If you're in the crowd and you don't know what's going on, but you know there's an emergency, this has got to be confusing. For the disciples, they have to feel a level of anxiety too. You can feel their angst. Jesus, what are we stopping for? Who cares if someone touched your coat? Of course someone touched your coat. You're in the middle of a mob, Jesus. And Jesus, with a calm and steady presence, says, no. Someone touched my coat. That is, there is a particular person who has reached out to touch me. Now picture the scene. Feel the angst. The whole procession has paused. There is palpable angst filling the air, and everyone, especially Jairus and the disciples, want to know who is responsible for this delay. And this woman knows Jesus is talking about her. And she came with fear and trembling, knowing what happened to her. And she came and fell down before him, and she told him the whole truth. Despite the fear of how the crowd might respond to the revelation that it was her, maybe even the fear that religious leaders would say, hey, you're violating religious laws by making Jesus ceremonially unclean. She comes to Jesus. She falls down before Jesus. She offers to Jesus the very same posture that the demon-possessed man we saw last week give to Jesus. And actually in the beginning of the text, we see Jairus give to Jesus. It's a posture of humility and surrender. But the phrase that stood out to me as I was restudying this text that I just find super interesting is this unique detail that Mark gives us in his gospel account. Mark says that this woman, she told him the whole truth. What an unusual phrase. What an unusual detail for a gospel writer to include into this account. It stands to reason that for Mark to point this out, this woman must have demonstrated a level of honesty about her life and about her situation that caught the attention of everyone who was observing this. It clearly stood out that the way she presented who she was, what was going on, this was unusual. She gives everything to Jesus. She touched Jesus secretly, but when Jesus asks her to identify herself, she leaves secrecy behind and she brings to bear complete honesty before the Lord. This might be a good phrase to highlight in our Bibles. There's something powerful about this confession. She doesn't ask for a private audience with Jesus. She doesn't shrink away. She doesn't leave. No, in front of strangers, in front of familiar faces, in front of the Son of God himself, she offers the whole truth. And I wonder in that moment, after she's unloaded her soul to Jesus, what she is expecting the response to be. Because let's be honest about the cultural and historical reality of the day. For this woman who was living on the margins of society, who was poor, ceremonially unclean, and all of the things, to come and arrest the attention of a rabbi by itself would have been socially out of order, not to mention that it is a rabbi who is in an emergency situation. Maybe she is expecting rebuke, dismissiveness, maybe patronizing pity. I don't know. But what Jesus says in response to her whole truth is noteworthy for several reasons. But at least today I want to note one. It's the only time we have these words recorded from Jesus in all of the gospel. Jesus says in response to her, daughter. Daughter. The first words out of Jesus' mouth to this anonymous woman who no one seemingly knew, who was anonymous, no one claimed, was daughter. The first words this woman heard, this woman who no one respected, the first words she heard from the Messiah was daughter. I think if you read the story really quietly, you can almost hear the crowd gasp. What did he say? Did he call her what I think she said? What he said? Again, it's socially out of order for her to speak to him at all, much less to unload her whole truth. But for Jesus to respond to her with such kind, tender, fatherly affection is stunning. It's beautiful. It's the backward, upside-down kingdom. And it's one of the reasons we wanted to put these miracle stories back to back to back. Because we are seeing the whole Jesus here, right? Early on in our Jesus teaching, we said we have got to be careful not to worship the Jesus that's in our own making, our own created version of Jesus, but the whole Jesus, right? Because 2 weeks ago, Jesus speaks and creation submits to him. Who is this that the winds and seas obey? And the version of Jesus that we're supposed to see there is the awe-inspiring Jesus of the universe. Last week, we see Jesus stand before evil, and evil trembles. It is intimidated by Jesus. It escapes Jesus. Jesus is aggressive towards the thing that is harming the people we love. So we see this power. We see this intense holiness. And in the very next miracle, we see gentle, fatherly affection. I don't want us to rush by this. When this woman touched Jesus' coat, her body was made whole. But when Jesus said to her, "Daughter," her inner soul was healed. Because he bestowed value on one that others did not value. He gave meaning to a life that others thought was meaningless. He gave standing and validation to a woman who had none. And he did so in front of the synagogue leader, of whose synagogue she was likely forbidden from entering. What a scene. But there's more. "Daughter," he said to her, "your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed from your affliction." What does Jesus mean here when he says your faith has saved you? I want to be clear. Jesus is not saying your confidence has activated my power. It's not like some sort of formula where she tapped into some sort of supernatural ability to get Jesus to do for her anything she wanted. No, what Jesus was saying was, is your trust in me opened you up for my saving work. It's not about technique. It's not a magical formula. It's actually not about having enough faith. Her faith was not the cause of Jesus' power. It was a response to the presence of Jesus in her life. This woman has demonstrated that she has zero self-faith, so she puts all of her trust and hope in the person of Jesus. And Jesus blesses her and assures her that her healing has been received and is permanent, and she may go in peace. And he says there's no follow-up tests. There's no expectations that you come and work off this great kindness for me. Just pure, unadulterated grace. The gospel on display. This is so wonderful. It's beautiful. But by the way, it's a story within a story. There's still some anxious people in the crowd because there's another emergency going on over here, right? And bam, just like that, seemingly another interruption of bad news comes. While he was still speaking to this woman and blessing her and assuring her, right? People came from the synagogue leader's house, presumably probably people of position, authority. Maybe this was a bit an assistant synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?" Now, I want to give these people a bit of grace. This is super sad news. When you get hit with the most devastating, traumatic news, and then when you've got to deliver bad news, you might not have the most sensitive approach. But this reads a little bit like frustration and sarcasm. Almost as if Jesus had been distracted, if Jesus hadn't been stopped, if Jesus had not given his attention to this woman who's on the margin, who has a chronic issue, not an acute issue, then everything would have been okay. Something might have been done. So why bother with the teacher now? And I love how Jesus responds. When Jesus overheard what was said, he told the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid, only believe." Now, if you're not paying attention, or if we're not keeping the cultural context of this event in our front view, we will miss what Jesus is doing, because what Jesus is doing here is significant. Jesus says to the synagogue ruler and to those who came and delivered the report about his daughter, no doubt men of well-regarded standing, not just politically, but spiritually, "Don't be afraid. Do what she did." Jesus upholds the faith of this woman on the margins and says to the most powerful people in the crowd, "Don't be afraid. You just need to have what she has. You need to do what she has done." Did you see that? Did you see that faith? Did you see that boldness? Did you see her willingness to tell the whole truth? Just have faith like her in me. It's not in the text, dads, but the implication is this dad said, okay, I'm going to go with you, Jesus. Because everybody starts laughing and mocking, and he continues on. And he goes with Jesus, and Jesus raises his little girl back to life. There's a lot of beautiful things happening in this text. This is one of the clearest, most patterns that Jesus was such a revolutionary person, and then he elevated poor people, those in poverty, those in margins, those who were socially vulnerable, in front of those who had ultimate power, particularly women. One of the things that we see in this text that should shape how we understand who Jesus is and how it should form how we think about virtues and things like power is that Jesus shows over and over. He calls it out and he teaches it, but then he demonstrates it. Jesus is the most powerful person there is. And how does Jesus leverage his power? He leverages his power for those with little or none. That's what Jesus does. It's extraordinary. I want to invite our worship folks, Ethan, to come back and prepare us for a time of prayer. I want to dial in here on a couple of applications, particularly the one that Jesus keeps pulling out here, both to the woman who had suffered chronically for 12 years and to the dad who's got a daughter who is in an acute emergency on death's door. Jesus asks both of them to have faith. Faith is one of those kind of vague things we talk about. What is faith? Faith is not certainty. Belief is not controlling and manipulating outcomes. Let me also say this. Trust, followers of Jesus, trust is not pretending that things are not broken. Faith is not putting a smile on it and saying everything's good, God is great, even though we feel like a whole world is falling apart. No, faith is bringing our broken things to Jesus before we know what he'll do. Faith is trusting the things in our life that are broken, that are not what we want, to Jesus, not knowing what will come next. Think about this. For this woman, faith looked like, if I can just touch his coat. For Jairus, the synagogue leader and father, faith looked like, I'm going to keep walking with Jesus. I'm going to go with Jesus even after I've received the worst news of my life. Prayer is an act of faith. Not because prayer guarantees healing, not because intensity produces miracles. No, we pray because Jesus told us to ask. There's something beautiful about the model of this woman who has suffered for 12 years. She's heard the stories, it would seem, about what Jesus has done for those who are sick, for those who are wounded, for those who are in need of hope. She's heard that Jesus has done things that other people can't do. And so she goes to Jesus, right? She has also heard that the thing to do is to go to this person, to go to this God-man, go to this rabbi. And so we pray because Jesus heals. We go after Jesus and we pray because we want to reach Jesus. We want to, in our own ways, touch his coat as well. We pray because Jesus is worthy of trust. And today I want to invite us into something simple yet profound, and it's to exercise faith. Hear me, exercise faith, not perform faith, not be awesome at faith today, not to prove faith, but to exercise faith, like mustard seed faith. I've done everything I know to do. I'm going to desperately work my way through the crowd to touch Jesus' garment. I'm a synagogue leader. Every one of my Jewish synagogue religious friends are super cynical and skeptical about this Jesus. They are not happy the way the crowds are beginning to turn to his influence. I don't care about my position. I care more about my 12-year-old. I will suffer whatever the consequences are to me socially, and I will be seen as a little bit foolish. I'm going to go to Jesus, right? There's a rejection of pride and an embrace of humility and faith to exercise faith. And I want you to see who Jesus' power and activity is available to. Jesus responds favorably to the powerful man who humbles himself and says, I'm going to go with Jesus. And with great tender affection, the one who could control creation looks this broken woman in the face. And I imagine, this is in the text, but I imagine with gentle tenderness in his eyes and his facial expressions, says something to her that no one has said to her. Kindness, daughter, you're welcome. And so where are you? Maybe you've been able for most of your life to be self-sufficient because you were smart and well-educated and you've worked hard. But the longer you live, you will discover smart, educated, decent bank account, all of the things will not protect you from the pain and brokenness of life. Man, that we would follow the model of Jairus and say, I will, in humility, admit, I've got no power over this thing in my life. Jesus, I need you. Maybe you're here today and you relate more to the woman who suffered 12 years chronically, and you feel like an outsider, you feel unseen, you feel unworthy. You feel like you've never had any power or an ability, and Jesus wants to say to you, and he wants you to hear deep in the deepest part of your soul and your spirit, he wants you to hear him say, daughter, your faith has made you whole. So today, if you need prayer for physical healing, if you need prayer for emotional healing, maybe some wounds that you've been carrying for years and years, maybe prayer for healing in a relationship, in a marriage between you and maybe an adult child. Maybe you've been fighting an addiction and you need freedom. Maybe you've been wrestling with the demons of the mind and you just want peace. Maybe you're conflicted about the future and you're like, I don't know what to do, and you need wisdom. Maybe you know what to do and you just need the courage to do it. I want to invite you to exercise faith in prayer. So I want to, again, as we did last week, I want to invite a handful of members of our prayer team, maybe a couple to come down here in the front row. Would love for a couple to go to the back corner where there's a little more space, where it's quieter. And we're just going to stand to our feet and just for a couple of minutes give you opportunity to exercise faith. There's this extraordinary passage in James, the half-brother of Jesus, who didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah when he was following Jesus. Let's give James a little bit of grace. You would not believe your sibling was the Messiah either. But in the aftermath of the resurrection, James comes to believe Jesus is the Messiah. And he writes this book, and he writes a lot about wisdom, and he writes a lot about trials and suffering, and he says to the people in the church, if any of in the church, if you're sick and you need healing, if you're wounded and you need peace, come to the spiritual leaders of the church, and the prayer of faith will heal you. Now I want you to check something out here. Jesus does not tell the people who are needing healing to have faith. He tells the people who are doing the praying for the people who are healing to have faith, which is just beautiful mercy and grace, right? Because sometimes we're in a place like another man when we come to Jesus, and our prayer is, I believe, but I really need you, Jesus, to help my unbelief. my favorite verse in all of the New Testament. I believe, except when I don't believe. And when I don't believe, Jesus, I need you to help my unbelief. So the prayer team is really about having faith for you, maybe when you don't feel like you have it yourself. It's intercession. It's a gift of prayer. So we're just going to have a couple minutes, and then we're going to sing in our last song. If you need to slip out, let's stand to our feet. I just want to encourage you. If you need healing today, the Bible verse is gone. That was going to point to. Don't be afraid. Do what she did. There it is. Don't be afraid. Do what she did. Come to Jesus. If you need prayer, it's available in the front. It's available in the back. Come now. If you need a touch of Jesus, if you need wisdom, if you need comfort, just come to Jesus. It's a spiritual family. We're here to care for each other, to love each other, support each other.